Morning. My name is Fred Tran, and I'm the Division Manager in the Housing Department. Today, I'll be providing information on the state's SB 91, as well as discussing the San Jose's moratorium on rent increases. My colleague Vivian Nguyen will be assisting during this webinar, and we will be addressing any questions after the presentation. Please also use the chat function to write any questions you may have, and I'll be happy to answer those questions at the conclusion of the presentation. Next. The state's COVID-19 Tenant Relief Act, referred to as SB 91, took effect on February 1, 2021. AB 3088 initially imposed a statewide moratorium on evictions between March 1, 2020 through January 31, 2021. SB 91 extends the protections through June 30, 2021. Now tenants are required to pay 25% of their rent owed from September 1, 2020 through June 2021 by June 30th to avoid eviction. The tenant must sign and return a declaration of COVID-related financial distress form within 15 days after receiving the notice from their property owner or manager. SB 91 also preempts the city's as well as the county's moratorium. Property owners are prohibited from charging late fees or interest on unpaid rent if the tenant has returned the declaration of COVID-19 related financial distress. The law adds new penalties against property owners who take actions such as locking a tenant out, throwing personal property out, or shutting off utilities rather than going through the courts. Next. On or before February 28th, a property owner must provide an updated declaration notice of COVID-19 related to financial distress to tenants who have not paid rent from March 1, 2020 to June 30, 2021. The declaration under SB 91 contains additional language regarding rental assistance, which was not included in the previous declaration under AB 3088. This declaration must be given before concurrently with the 15-day notice to pay or quit if the property owner wants to initiate an unlawful detainer. SB 91 has additional protections, including providing financial assistance to qualifying property owners to pay up to 80% of a tenant's unpaid rents accrued between April 1, 2020 and March 31, 2021. The bill includes prioritization of rental assistance. The first prioritization will be going to tenants who are below 50% of the area median income, or AMI. Funding availability will be communicated through the city's Emergency Operations Center once it's available. Links of the website will be made available once we get clarity on this program. Next. In 2020, the city had passed a moratorium on rent increases for apartments that are subject to the apartment rent ordinance and mobile homes. That rent increase moratorium had expired December 31, 2020. On February 2nd, 2021, City Council passed a 2021 moratorium on rent increases for apartments as well as mobile homes. The current moratorium on rent increases requires a declaration of COVID-related financial distress form. The city created a declaration form that may be used by both tenants and property owners, which is posted on our website. The 2021 moratorium or rent increase will only apply to those households who submit a declaration of COVID-19 related financial distress to the property owners after receiving a notice of rent increase. Please note that tenants who are not financially impacted or do not submit a declaration of COVID related financial distress are not covered under the moratorium. Next. The moratorium became effective February 2nd, 2021. It applies to rent increases for February 2nd through June 2021. If rent increases taken effect on March 1, 2021, the moratorium will still apply. The moratorium is not retroactive to December or February for rent increases. The law applies to any apartment rent ordinance tenant, mobile home residents, or mobile home owners who submit their declaration of COVID-19 related financial distress. Next. The new ordinance prohibits filing of tenant petitions based on service reductions if the apartment had closed common areas to comply with local public health orders. Also, late fees shall not accrue through June 30, 2021 for failure to pay for housing fees for units subject to the apartment rent ordinance. Finally, there's a waiver of building for repairs and maintenance of permit fees for rental properties subject to the apartment rent ordinance. Next. The City of San Jose first proposed a 2020 moratorium on rent increases on April 28, 2020, with the understanding that mounting rent burdens can easily become insurmountable. The 2021 moratorium or rent increase is a targeted approach to ensure that those who are impacted by the pandemic continue to receive protections. Neither the federal government nor the state or county have taken legislative action to prevent rent increases. The city worked with the rental community to protect the most vulnerable renters within our community. Next. Recent pandemic response has increased rental assistance funding at the federal and state level. Due to the influx of this funding, on February 9th, City Council voted on a hybrid method of funding distribution. The hybrid method will have the city and county work in conjunction to distribute local and federal funds to the most vulnerable residents within the community. This will also be working with the state's program. This funding distribution method aims to assist in paying back rents and outlines prioritization for the most vulnerable. The city and the county will rely on community-based organizations already in touch with most vulnerable residents to meet the assistance needs as quickly as possible. The rental assistance may be available in March. The state is scheduled to be available March 15th, 2021. They're currently updating their portal. Funding is prioritized to pay qualifying property owners, and they are encouraged to apply for the assistance through a funding stream set by the state. Up to 80% of accrued rents may be repaid. If the property owner goes or agrees to this method, and the qualifying tenants will be ordered to pay 25% of rent due by June 30, 2021 under the state law. Outreach and websites from our program are going to continually be updated to update the rental community. Next. You may contact the Rent Stabilization Program at 408-975-4480 or email us at rsp@sanjoseca.gov with any questions on the rent increase moratorium or any of these rental assistance programs. This concludes my presentation. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Okay, thank you, Fred. So currently, we had some questions through the Q&A. There's been a lot of questions about rent relief and where can individuals find more information?
Yeah, right now, both the state as well as the city are updating our portals. The city recently had decided to use the hybrid method, And the office, basically EOC, the emergency office within city manager's office, will be putting the program together. On the state's portal, where their key website, they're currently updating theirs as well. More likely, March timeframe is when all the portals will be up for the rental assistance application or information.
Great, thank you, Fred. And there are additional questions regarding whether or not landlords can still apply for rent funds if the tenant does not want to participate.
Yeah, absolutely. There's actually still rent funds available within we're still working with the community-based organizations, and they absolutely can apply for those. If you contact our program, we can send you the list and the flyers to apply for those funds.
Great, thank you. Thank you everyone for posting questions on where they get more information on rent funds and how landlords apply. We are still going to provide more information as our program receives more information to share. And it looks like Anil also pasted in the chat box for more information and declaration from the California Apartment Association. So folks can also go there to get more information. All right, so the next question is verification on whether tenants would be able to claim if they're actually experiencing hardship. Is there a verification process?
Actual, no particular verification process. It's a form that they have to sign under perjury stating that they are impacted financially by the pandemic. And this is regarding rent increase or states?
It did not specify, but let's say for both sides, for the SB 91 and also the moratorium rent increases.
Yeah, so SB 91, similar, there's a declaration form that needs to be filed and signed and returned within 15 days, and that is signed under perjury. There is no financial support that's required unless they are over 130% AMI, then the landlord has the right to request additional support. For the city's declaration of COVID-19 related financial distress, that form needs to be signed and returned to the property owner by the tenant for the city's rent increase.
Great, thank you, Fred. And another follow-up question is, what kind of documentation do tenants need to provide in order to receive either the rent relief funds for landlords?
For the rent relief funds, it's actually, typically it's going to require additional support. They're still working on that program. I know with the city's funds, basic information as in a lease or possible financial requirements would be required, but it's a case intake process and each organization has their own established. So it's actually best to contact each program directly. I apologize, I can't give specifics, but it will require some basic documentation. Some will have more arduous requirements than others. So the best scenario is to check with our program once the federal funding process is complete and we can provide that information. Or you can also contact the states at their Housing is Key website once the state sets up their portal.
Great, thank you. The next question is about for under the moratorium on rent increases, can landlords still issue a rent increase if the tenant signs the declaration, then they cannot move forward? Is that correct?
Correct. So initially, the process should be where a landlord or property owner, property manager submits both a notice of rent increase as well as a declaration of COVID-related financial distress at the same time. And if the tenant does not return that form back to the landlord, they are allowed to increase rents according to each ordinance, whether it's a mobile home or the apartment rent ordinance limits.
So there are also additional questions just regarding rent relief and how do landlords know what organizations to apply. And so I know Fred has already mentioned this as well, but the best way to get most up-to-date information is to sign up for our e-blast, and that's at rsp@sanjoseca.gov. Once we have more information, we will definitely let everyone know. Currently, we don't, and so we just wanted to at least share that this is up and coming. Okay, and so the next question is about the declaration. What happens if a landlord does not send a tenant's COVID-19 declaration to the San Jose Housing Department?
And this is specifically for the rent increase, then technically the tenant, if the tenant did actually return the declaration form, then potentially that rent increase would not be in effect. Then our program would actually have to coordinate with both parties to establish the facts as to what and when these documents were submitted.
Great, thank you. And do you happen to know if organizations who are administering the rent relief would have different requirements?
Yes, they would. It's primarily due to where the funds are originating from. So the federal funds that the city is going to administer will have different requirements than the states. And unfortunately, I can't answer that directly because each program is still being established and the requirements are still being set in place. So as soon as we do hear from either agencies, we will update our site accordingly. Even if the state updates theirs, we'll do an informational to let you know that theirs is up to date.
A follow-up to that is, what about the declaration form for SB 91? What happens if the landlord does not send that to the housing department?
Well, that's actually held in a different jurisdiction since it's state law. So essentially, if they don't submit that to the program, it potentially may in the future, if the eviction progresses, that could be a protection for the tenant in the evictions court. So it's actually held at a different jurisdiction.
Okay. I know there were additional questions on how to get access to this recording, and in which case that will be posted on our website. So I'm going to directly link it to the inquiry. Okay, there was another follow-up question on the requirements of the city in order to send the declaration for the moratorium on rent increases. Fred, can you please clarify again if they can move forward with a rent increase?
If the tenant, so essentially a property owner or property manager should submit a notice of rent increase in conjunction with the declaration of the COVID-related financial distress form. If the tenant does not return that form in sufficient time, then they are allowed to increase the rents, because this moratorium is more factored on tenants that are impacted by the pandemic.
Okay, more questions on the form requirements. And so Fred, can you just specify again what form is needed under the eviction moratorium or SB 91, and then also the rent moratorium?
Yeah, so the city, if you go to the city site or our department site for the rent increase moratorium, there is a declaration of COVID-19 related financial distress, and that's more focused just on the rent increase. So if the property owner can pull that form from our website and submit that at the same time as a rent increase notice. And then on the state's SB 91, their site, it's the Housing is Key website, and that's actually a very I would definitely recommend you to refer to that, because it has all the legal language for the SB 91 declaration requirements, which states that the tenant is also impacted financially by COVID. And then it also has the 15-day requirement for the tenant to return it back to the landlord.
Okay, thank you. More questions on how to submit applications for rental relief. And again, that can be provided. If you sign up for our e-blast, we can definitely send you more information.
Yeah. Just to highlight on this, we're estimating between early March to mid-March is when these programs will actually be functioning. That's ultimately the goal. And once we do become aware that they are live and the funds are available, we'll inform everybody via email blast.
And Fred, can you clarify SB 91 and what that covers? And then also for the moratorium on rent increases and what that covers? I think folks are getting confused between the two different types of declarations and what they're being used for.
Okay. Yeah, so coverage, I would say that the most critical piece for the rent increase moratorium, it's for apartments that are subject to the apartment rent ordinance, which essentially are the apartments that were built prior to September 1979. As well, the mobile homes are also protected under the rent increase moratorium. On SB 91, that actually covers essentially all rental properties, so owners of residential rental properties as well as rental units and mobile homes. So that scope is much larger than the rent increase moratorium.
Okay, great. And as a follow-up, does the rent increase moratorium apply to low-income properties?
No, it does not apply to low-income properties. Essentially, low-income properties, if it's a designated affordable deed restricted property, then their rental increases are subject to a different ordinance than ours. So affordable properties are not subject to the rent increase moratorium.
Great. And additional follow-up questions on the declaration. So what if the landlord does not send in a declaration of the hardship that the tenant has filled out?
If the landlord has not submitted that to the program, depending on if it's the declaration for financial distress for rental increase, it's basically where if the tenant submits that to the landlord, they're going to be protected for rental increase. It should be sent to our program, but the tenant would use that in their defense, so the rent can't be increased. On the state side, the tenant would use their declaration form. If it's signed under perjury, then it would limit the property owner from moving forward with the eviction process as long as they pay that 25% by June 30th.
Okay. So it's a lot of different questions for declarations. And so the declaration just really needs to be submitted to our program under SB 91. And then again, the moratorium on rent increases cannot move forward if a tenant signs a declaration indicating that they have financial distress. And in summary, the moratorium on rent increases only applies to rent-controlled apartments and mobile homes. And that it does not apply to Section 8 tenants as well. So with that, a lot of the questions currently in the chat box is related to the declarations. And so our information will be posted on our website. The recording will also be available on our website. If you would like to sign up for the latest e-blasts regarding rent relief and programs, please send us an email at rsp@sanjoseca.gov.
And that concludes all the questions, Vivian?
Yes.
Okay.
A lot of the questions still open is related to the declarations and forms that's already been answered.
Okay. Thank you for attending this webinar. I appreciate it.